Hello everyone, I'm Stella.
And I'm Tarrant from Meeple University. Today we'll be teaching you how to play the Village Big Box. This includes the original game Village and then all of the expansions which have been published to date. This game is designed by Inka and Marcus Brand and published by Eggert Spieler.
What are you waiting for? Let's get to the game.
Originally released in 2011, Village is a Euro game in which a family of farmers over multiple generations will run their farms, go out to seek employment in the wider village, and do their best to be the one with the most victory points at the end of the game. Now comes the Village Big Box, a release of all previous Village content and expansions. In this video, we'll take you through it all. The base game, indicated by the sun and components with no special icon. The inn, represented by the beer mug. Marriage, represented by the rings. The port, represented by the anchor. The mini life goals module, and the promos indicated by the star. To set up the base game, place the board on the sun side and take all the components with no special icon. Importantly, among the wooden pieces, each player must return a Generation 1 worker to the box, along with one of the 7 black cubes. These are all used only in the Marriage expansion. Also return the ship, this is used in the Port expansion. Each player takes their farm board, a coin, puts their time marker on the first space from the quill, and puts their 4 Generation 1 workers into their farm. This is the foundation of your family. These later generation workers are yet to be born. Place your score marker at 0. Shuffle the customer tiles face down and then flip face up into each market space which matches your player count. So for 3 players you'd fill these 4 blue spaces and all 5 brown spaces. The blue goods tiles form a supply near the blue buildings. Near the church, place the black bag with the 4 black monk meeples inside. Then near the graveyard, place the chronicle. Together, these will time when the game ends. And you can use a non-player colour of worker to block out any spaces which don't match your player count or expansion. These 2 spaces are used only when playing the Marriage expansion. Choose a first player who takes the bird token and place the next round's first player ring token on the council chamber. Give later players in turn order their starting bonus. For the second player, a grain. For the third player, a random influence cube. Then a chosen influence cube and a coin. Finally, among all of the double-sided round setup cards, find the one which matches your player count and game mode. You're now ready to play. Village is played in an indeterminate number of rounds, and you'll set up each round according to your setup card. First, you'll take a number of influence cubes from the supply based on what's shown on the left-hand bar of the card. So here, 4 pink, 5 green, 4 orange, and 4 brown. You'll also take all of the black plague cubes, and if they're not all available in the supply, simply take as many as you have. Put all of those cubes into the green bag, adding them to any cubes that are left in the bag from previous rounds. You'll now seed the main board with those cubes based on what's shown on the right-hand side of the card. This card calls for 1 cube on the market space, 6 on the craft space, 3 on the church space, and so on. The round is then played in turns, starting from the first player and going clockwise around the table. On your turn, you must choose one location which still has at least 1 cube, and take one of the cubes. If it is a coloured influence cube, add it to your farm board. Influence cubes are resources which you'll use to pay for many actions. If you take a black coloured plague cube, you will instead return the cube to the supply and advance your time marker 2 steps around the track. There are times when this will be advantageous, but most of the time you'll be choosing to take influence rather than plague. Whichever cube you chose, you may now take an action at that location. Taking the action is optional, taking a cube on your turn is not. The round ends at the end of the turn in which the final cube is taken off the board. You'll resolve any end of round effects, which in this game mostly relates to the church location, and then reseed the board with cubes for the next round. The game is all about building up the status of your family in the village over multiple generations. To begin the game, you'll have 4 Generation 1 workers, and they're all positioned on your farm board, meaning that they are currently employed as farmers. Through the game, anytime you gain a new worker, you'll take the lowest numbered worker from your supply and then add it to your board as a new farmer. Many of the game's actions involve placing a worker onto the main board. And this always means taking a worker of any number from your farm and moving it to a new worker location. This signifies the worker giving up farming, going into the village, and taking on a new job. Here, for example, this worker is now the village wainwright. This one has entered the council chambers and become a councillor. This is now that worker's permanent job. It remains there on the board unless you take a specific action to recall it. There is no limit to the number of workers who may take on a certain job. Village is an intergenerational game. New family members will come and old family members will pass on. This is tracked by your time track. Anytime you take an action that brings your time marker past the quill, at the end of the turn in which that happens, one of your oldest family members will die. Choose any one of your lowest or equal lowest numbered workers from either your farm board or the main board. Check the location where it was based, and then move it to any matching space in the village chronicle. This represents the stories that future generations will tell about the people who made the village great. For example, remember old yellow number 1? He was the best wainwright we ever had. Family members from your farm board will go into the yellow section. If the appropriate section of the village chronicle is full, then I'm afraid there'll be no stories told about this passing family member. Simply place that worker into an empty slot in the graveyard. There are benefits in positioning your workers so that you can fill as much of the chronicle as possible, since there are endgame victory points for the number of workers you have there. The end of the game will be triggered once either the chronicle or the graveyard is completely full. Now we'll look at all the different actions, starting with the craft buildings, as this is the one which has the most cubes placed at the start of each round. When you choose this action, you may use one of the 5 crafting buildings once. If you choose the mill, you have one option. You must pay 2 grain from your farm and 2 time on your time track to gain 2 coins. To use any other building, you have 2 options. You could purchase the goods, in which case you pay the influence or grain in the top right corner of the box and take one of that building's goods. The other option is to train your worker in that craft and then produce the goods yourself. Firstly, if you don't already have a worker trained in that craft, then pay the amount of time shown on the tree next to the building. So here it would be 3 time to train my worker as a blacksmith. Then, to produce the good, you must spend the amount of time shown on the bottom left of that building to produce 1. If you think of it over the course of the game, the first time this worker produces a plough as an action, it's going to cost you 6 time, and each subsequent occasion will cost you 3. Goods you gain simply go next to your player board, and there's no limit to the number or type of goods you can take. The red action space is the council chambers, and here you can appoint your workers as councillors and move them up through the ranks for more points and better rewards. Once you've chosen the action, pay the action's cost, which will either be 2 green influence or 1 scroll, and a certain amount of time. If you're appointing a new councillor, the cost is 1 time, and you place your worker on the first space. If you use the action to promote a worker to the next step to the right, then pay the time cost in the new box. So this step here would cost 2 influence or a scroll and 2 time. You can only appoint or move 1 councillor per turn. Then, whether you chose to do this or not, if you have any councillors on the track, choose one of them and claim the reward printed either above or in any box to the left of that councillor. Here you get 2 influence of your choice from the supply. Here you get a goods token of your choice from the supply. Here you could cash in a coin for 3 immediate victory points. These are usually worth only 1 point at the end of the game. And the first person each round to take this effect takes the ring, and this allows them to be first player in the next round. At the end of the game, each councillor will score points based on its final position. The green action space lets you send your workers out to go travelling to distant cities. When you take the action, you may optionally appoint a new traveller, meaning take one of your workers and place it at the start of the travel track. Or if you already have at least one worker on the travel track, you could choose that worker and take the action with it. Either way, move the worker along the light-coloured path. When you reach a cost box, pay the full cost in there. So here you'd return a wagon to the supply, pay 2 time and 2 brown influence. And then stop when you reach a castle, gain the immediate benefit shown, here it's 3 victory points, and place down one of your discs on that city if you don't already have one there. The number of discs you get down during the game will score you points at the end. Multiple players may have discs in the same city, but if you visit a city for the second time, you place neither a disc nor gain the reward. The grey action space is the church, and when you take this action, you can spend either 3 time or 1 brown influence to put one of your workers in training to join the clergy. At this point, all that happens is you add that worker to the black bag. Everything else that happens in this phase resolves during the mass phase, which occurs at the end of the round. While a worker is in the bag, it is not considered on the main board, meaning it cannot be chosen for death when your time marker passes the quill. At the market, players can sell goods and grain to customers for victory points. This action space works quite differently to the others. There's only ever 1 cube here, and when a player takes it, instead of having an optional action that player may resolve, the player has triggered Market Day, which must resolve for all players. Starting with the player who took the cube, players will now take mini turns in turn order during Market Day, each having the option to make 1 sale or pass. Only the customers in the blue bordered spaces are available on this Market Day. All the ones in brown are the ones who'll fill up the empty gaps after this Market Day is complete. Firstly, the player who triggered Market Day may make a sale, returning the goods or grain to the supply and taking the customer token, flipping it face down and adding it to their collection. The points on this will score at the end of the game. You'll now continue in turn order, each player having the option to either make 1 sale or pass. But for each subsequent sale, the player making it must spend 1 green influence and 1 time. This includes the player who triggered the Market Day if they do come to take a second sale later in the turn. Once all players have passed, fill up the spaces from the front of the customer queue, slide the rest of the customers around and refill the empty spaces from the deck. Also note that if one of your family members dies as the result of your time payment, you'll resolve that death immediately. This applies only to Market Day deaths and breaks the normal rule that you wait until the end of the turn before resolving the death. The final action spaces are the farm actions. With this action, you can run your farm. Your farm produces 2 grain. This increases to 3 if you have a horse and plough, or 4 if you have an ox and plough. These rewards are not additive. You'll either get 3 or 4, but not both. You have a maximum capacity for 5 grain. If you were to go above that, any excess is lost. Also be aware you must still have at least 1 worker on your farm board to take this action. If you sent all of your workers off to the village to do other trades, there's no one left to run the farm and no one left to produce grain. With this action, you've got 2 options. You could expand your family. adding your next lowest numbered worker from your supply to your farm board. Your other option is to call a family member back to the farm. Retrieve any worker back from the main board and make them into a farmer once again. This is the only way other than death that a worker ever leaves a profession they've been assigned to on the main board. There is one final action on the board, which is shown here. This is called the well. It is not seeded with cubes during setup. Instead, in order to take this action, you must spend 3 matching influence cubes from your supply. This then allows you to take any one of the other actions on the main board. Be aware that a round ends once all of the cubes have been taken from action spaces. That means you won't be able to take well actions after this has happened. Players should also note that at any point when spending influence cubes, a coin may be spent as a cube of any colour. So this player could, for example, spend these to take the well action. Once the round is over, you'll proceed to the mass phase, and here you'll determine which of the workers from the church bag will graduate to join the clergy. Only 4 workers get this opportunity per round, and if you'll remember, there are 4 neutral black monks in this bag. As such, there's an element of chance, and you may want to stack things in your favour. For this, each player has 1 turn in turn order to pay any amount of coins and take that same number of their own workers from the bag, adding them to the clergy. Once all players have taken or passed on this opportunity, you'll randomly draw workers from the bag until the total number taken this round is 4. Any player workers drawn are placed on the first step of the track, and any monks drawn are returned to the bag. Now, again in turn order, each player has the opportunity to pay as much grain as they want to promote as many of their clergy as they want. You can move multiple workers or the same worker multiple spaces as part of this turn. Here, yellow could pay 2 grain to advance this, 1 grain to advance this, and 2 to advance this. Ignore the bread icon, this is used only in the marriage expansion. Once all players are done, whoever has the most workers on this track gains 2 immediate victory points. If tied, whoever worker is furthest to the right breaks the tie, irrespective of which generation, and if still tied, all tied players get the points. If anyone took the next starting player ring, that player becomes the first player and the ring goes back to the board. Otherwise, the starting player stays where it was. You'll now reset for the next round following the setup card. The end of the game is triggered when either the chronicle or the graveyard is completely filled. Whoever placed this last worker triggered the end. And if it was triggered on that player's turn, then each other player gets 1 more turn. If it was triggered during a market day by a player who was not the active player, then all players get 1 more turn. If a player goes to take one of these endgame turns and there are no cubes left on the board, then the player may take any action but does not get to take a cube. Then, whether there are any cubes left on the board or not, you'll complete the final mass phase and then you'll go to final scoring. Score points for each of your discs on the travel map. Score 2, 4 or 6 points for each promoted councillor. Score 2, 3, 4 or 6 points for each of your clergymen. Score 4, 7 or 12 points if you have 3, 4 or 5 family in the chronicle. Reveal and score the points on all of your customer tiles, and finally score 1 point for each leftover coin. The player with the highest score wins. If tied, whoever has the most grain remaining wins. If still tied, most living workers, and if still tied, victory is shared. The Inn expansion introduces 2 new buildings, the brewery and the inn. 1 new resource, beer, and helpful villager cards, who will come to your aid if you give them beer. There are also some new customers who get shuffled into the customer deck. The double-sided inn board is slightly asymmetrical. There's a small difference to the action cost. Choose the side you wish to play and then set it up along here. Shuffle the 30 villager cards, split them into 3 decks of 10 and place them face up on these 3 inn slots. Then change out the setup card for the one showing the inn. The game adds a 6th blue craft building, which belongs to the basic craft building action. By choosing the action and choosing the brewery, you can get 2 beer, either by paying 3 grain, or by training a brewer for 3 time and spending 3 time to make the beer. Your new action space at the inn allows you to gain a villager card. To take this action, you must train an innkeeper for 1 time if you haven't already trained one. Then pay the cost here, which depending on the side of the board will be an influence of your choice or a time. Then you must choose one of the 3 decks and move the villager that's on top of that deck to the bottom. Finally, you may recruit one of the villagers by paying the cost in the top left corner and then adding the card to your hand. If the inkwell icon is empty, this is an endgame scoring card. You'll hang on to it till the end and then score the points as shown. If there's a full inkwell, then you'll play the card at some point during the game, resolving its effect immediately. When a brewer dies, it can go to the craft space of the chronicle, but when an innkeeper dies, there is no space here. He simply goes to the graveyard. The innkeepers are probably the ones keeping most of these stories alive. They're too modest to include themselves. The marriage expansion introduces another new board, new components in bread and tools, and 2 new action spaces. To set up, place the marriage board, and again this has 2 different sides and you can choose either of them to play. In the Chronicle, you'll now use any of the marriage spaces which correspond to your player count. This is considered a yellow space. And any worker who dies from the marriage board can go onto any yellow space, not just the marriage one. You begin the marriage mode with 5 first-generation workers instead of 4. The 7th plague cube is added to the game. And take careful note that the gain family member's action space gets no cubes in the first round only. You'll use only 2 of the 3 pink-coloured neutral workers that come with the game. The marriage board introduces 2 new actions, the smuggler and the ceremony. When you take the smuggler action, choose one of 3 different options. You may spend 2 time and 1 green influence to sell any number of bread or tools, and we'll explain how you get these a little bit later, to the smuggler for 2 victory points per tile. You could choose to spend 1 influence to make a sale to a single customer who's in one of the waiting brown locations of the market. Or you could spend 1 time to gain any 2 different influence cubes. The main new action is marriage, and this is indicated by the ceremony action and then the wedding phase, which occurs after the mass phase at the end of each round. To take the ceremony action, you must pay 1 influence and 2 time in order to take any one of your workers and place it onto one of the 6 steps of the ceremony track. You can only have a single worker on this track at any time. You then gain the reward printed next to your slot. Workers nearer the bottom of this track are in higher ranked slots. They have worse rewards, but they'll fare better in the wedding phase. When the round is over and mass is complete, you'll go to the wedding phase, and I'll show you round 1's wedding phase first, before showing you how it changes once there are previous weddings complete. Step 1 is always the same. You'll try to place 1 neutral worker onto the ceremony track. Roll the 4-sided die, and if it's still available, place the worker in that slot. If it's not available, no neutral worker is placed this round. Next, determine who is married. In a 2 or 3 player game, the highest and second highest ranked workers will be married. In a 4 or 5 player game, the 3rd and 4th ranked workers would also be married. These workers are now a couple, and whichever was the higher ranked worker chooses whether the wedding present they gain will be bread or tools. If the neutral worker was highest ranking, roll the die to determine. Both couples could choose the same wedding present in a 4 or 5 player game. You'll go to step 2 where you'll move workers around this board. So new couples will go into the locations of their wedding presents. And anyone who's unmarried goes through this space where they may spend 1 influence to gain either a bread or tool, and then return to their farm boards. Then comes step 3 where anyone still on the board gains rewards. Each player in one of these locations separately gets to choose whether they take the left or right reward. Once you get to the second round, the phases of the movement step increase. Now any couples who were in the honeymoon houses will go over to their permanent houses, and the new couples will enter the honeymoon. These couples all now have children, so each player who owns one of these workers gets to take a new worker from the supply according to the normal rules. Then, as the game goes on, there are 2 ways that these couples could be broken up. If both of the neutral workers are in couples, then when the time comes to place a new neutral worker at the start of the wedding phase, you will roll the die, take the worker who has been over here the longest, and move it to the ceremony area. The couple can also be broken up when one of the 2 workers dies. In this case, when the time comes to start moving the workers in the second step of the wedding phase, anyone who is now alone leaves these houses via this path, returning to the players' farmyards. You'll then move all of the remaining couples according to the normal rules. Marriage also introduces the new items, tools and bread. A single bread can be spent instead of the required amount of grain to advance 1 step on the clergy track. You can also place a bread underneath one of your workers at any time to treat that worker as if its generation number is 1 step higher. So this is now a generation 2 worker. You might want to do this if you think there's more points on offer keeping this worker alive than sending it to the Chronicle. You may only do this once per worker. Tools may be spent when taking the crafting action in order to double the output of your action. For example, if I already had a blacksmith trained, then I would spend 3 time plus a tool to get 2 plows. Bread and tools are not types of goods. You cannot take them with this icon. With the port expansion, flip the main board over to the port side. The board is mostly unchanged, but the travel part of the board is now travel by sea. To set up, each player puts their ship in the dock, and on these islands you'll put the cocoa and tea bales, equal to the number of players plus 1, and on this island you'll shuffle up the 6 treasure chests. There'll be 3 decks of captain cards, each with a different cost, and each player gets a shipboard. Sailing is a perhaps high cost but high reward way of selling goods and resources from the village out to the surrounding islands and bringing back the riches those islands have on offer. All sailing actions are done with the travel space, and there are 3 different ways you could take this action. You could use it to set sail from the port, continue sailing around the sea, or return to your home port. When you set sail, the first thing you must do is hire a captain. You can't simply train your workers to become ship's captains. It's too specialised. You have to hire one. Pay the amount of coins printed on the card you want, and then take that captain. The higher the cost, the better the captain will be at moving. Next, load up the cargo holds of your ship with up to 3 different playing pieces. These could be goods tokens, grain tokens, or family members. But each piece must be different. You could, for example, load 2 goods like so, but you couldn't load both wagons, or you couldn't load multiple family members, even if they came from different generations. Critically, once these pieces are on the boat, you no longer have access to them for actions in the village. You couldn't appoint this villager to a job in the village, nor would you be able to use your horse and plough to run your farm anymore. These are on a boat, not at the farm. Now move your ship. Starting from here and entering the pathways at this point, You may move as many spaces as you can afford, and this will be based on your captain card. Your first space is always free. Each subsequent space or spaces will cost some amount of influence, and this will depend on which captain card you take. Each space you enter with a time icon will also cost you 1 time. So with this captain, I could pay 1 green influence to take my free action, and then move 1 more step, paying 1 time. When you reach the dock of any island, you may stop your movement for this turn and then perform any number of actions at that island. If the island has a sales box and you have those goods in your cargo hold, then you can spend those goods returning them to the supply for immediate victory points. If there is an empty lighthouse and you have one of your workers in your cargo hold, then you're going to appoint that worker a lighthouse keeper at the cost of the resources shown to the left of that box. Some of these include a wagon as part of the cost, and if it does, you must have that wagon in your ship's cargo hold as well. But any influence cost simply comes from your supply. Then immediately gain the victory points shown. Then if the island has cocoa, tea or treasure, take the top tile from that stack and add it to an empty slot on your ship. You must have space and can't just throw goods overboard to make space, and the rule that all components in here must be different still applies. If you pick up a treasure chest, you can look to see how much money is inside. It will be between 3 and 5, but remember that until you get this back to shore, you won't be able to cash it in or use it. The second way to use this action is to continue sailing. It works the same way as setting sail, except you don't have to hire another captain, and you skip the step of loading your ship from your farm board. The third way to travel is to return home. Always spend 1 time regardless of your location and return directly to port. Unload your ship, cashing in any treasure chests for gold if you wish, and remove your captain from the game permanently. You'll gain rewards for your tea and cocoa by selling it at the market. To this end, there are 2 permanent stalls. These always count as being blue bordered stalls, and they're always available for any player to sell to, including multiple players in the same round. Any cocoa and tea sold to these stalls is removed from the game. There are a few other changed rules. When taking this action, which would normally allow you to retrieve a worker from the board, you cannot use it to retrieve a worker from your ship, nor a lighthouse keeper. Either of these 2 worker types can die by the normal method, and they'll normally go to the green travel section of the Chronicle. However, if it's full, instead of going to the graveyard, they will instead have a burial at sea, and the first 2 to die this way will score some immediate victory points. If all 3 sea burial spaces are full, this also triggers the end of the game. All 3 major expansions are cross-compatible. You'll find villager cards that work with the marriage and port expansions, and you'll find specific treasure chests that work with the marriage expansion. Be wary that there are 4 of the villager cards from the basic inn expansion which are not compatible with the port. You'll find some promo tiles which are indicated by the star. You'll just have to be careful not to use any which contain components in expansions you're not using. Finally, you can use the Life Goals mini expansion to add some new objectives to the game. Deal each player 1 silver and 1 gold life goal to begin the game. To score the points on the card, you must at some stage during the game meet the requirements shown on the right hand side. You must simply meet those requirements at a time. You don't have to give anything up to score it. As soon as you meet those requirements, here for example, holding 3 scrolls and having these 4 influence, remove the card from the game and immediately score the points. Again, be wary that some of these objectives either don't work with or require a certain expansion. And that's how to play the Village Big Box. We hope you enjoyed this video.
And thank you so much for watching. Everything you do will help us. Every single view, every time you like our videos, our Instagram, every single comment, and let us know you're there. And make sure you're doing something fun today. See you next time.